One early spring morning, 78-year-old Arthur Caldwell sat by the window, his heart heavy with loneliness, as was his habit. Outside, a thin mist cloaked the dawn. The wind whistled through the alleyways, and the distant wail of sirens and rumble of traffic seemed to declare, "This city never sleeps." But each time Arthur Caldwell heard these familiar urban sounds, they only deepened his sense of isolation. Decades earlier, he had divorced his beloved wife and raised their 3 children alone. For his children's sake, he never hesitated to take on any job that brought in money, from construction work and cleaning to delivering packages. Every day left him utterly exhausted, but his single purpose was to ensure his children could grow up to stand on their own feet. Over the years, people praised him as a great father who had given everything for his family. Whenever he heard such words, a quiet pride stirred within him. Eventually, all 3 of his children became independent. Arthur Caldwell now owned a small apartment building and had a modest but comfortable retirement pension. On the surface, he seemed to live a successful retired life. Yet deep inside, he felt a persistent loneliness. His children seldom visited, and sometimes they even quarreled over trivial things. As he grew older, he began to fear that his children and others around him might see him as a burden. Then one day, by pure chance, a new connection entered his life. A friend called to say an elderly welfare center needed volunteers. The center was running cultural exchange programs that brought seniors and foreign students together through gardening and shared meals. His friend casually suggested he stop by if he had time, and Arthur Caldwell, without thinking much of it, decided to go. In a corner of the center's courtyard, people were already busy planting flower and vegetable seedlings. Among them, 2 young women stood out. Their dark skin glowed beautifully, and their bright smiles lit up their faces as they assisted the elderly with genuine kindness. They were 22-year-old Tessa and 21-year-old Nay, both from Nigeria. Arthur was surprised by their thoughtful and sincere behavior. Despite their youth, they cared deeply for the elderly, engaging them in friendly conversation without hesitation. If someone struggled to stand, they quickly offered a helping hand. When words fell short, they used warm gestures to communicate. Arthur Caldwell found himself watching them again and again. After the volunteer activities, the center provided a simple meal, and Arthur naturally sat at the same table as the 2 women. He hesitated, but then asked, "Are you from Nigeria?" Tessa and Nay gave him bright, genuine smiles and nodded. "Yes, we've been studying in the United States for about a year. We're here to study international social welfare," they explained. Arthur Caldwell's heart skipped a beat. There was an undeniable distance between them in both age and culture. Yet their warm smiles and kind presence seemed to awaken a long-lost feeling in him. A gentle warmth he had not felt in years returned to his chest. As the volunteer session ended, Arthur felt a secret thrill hearing they would be back for the next program in a few days. "I'm a man in my 70s, and they're just university students," he reminded himself, trying to calm his excitement. Still, he could not hide how eager he felt to see them again. When they met at the center a few days later, Tessa and Nay greeted him cheerfully, and they picked up their conversation where they had left off. Arthur's story of raising his 3 children alone came up naturally, and Tessa and Nay admired his devotion. "That's truly incredible. My parents also sacrificed a lot, but they never raised 3 children alone," they said, eyes shining with respect. From that point on, the 3 of them met frequently at volunteer events and senior care activities, eventually meeting even outside those programs. Arthur Caldwell felt surprisingly at ease in this unexpected friendship. Tessa and Nay started calling him teacher and treated him with heartfelt respect. Even with their busy lives in the U.S., they kept in touch regularly. One day, Tessa and Nay invited him to eat out. "If dinner is too late, lunch is fine too. We found a really good restaurant," they said. Arthur Caldwell gladly accepted their invitation, though he could not help but wonder to himself, "Why am I so excited?" But his heart had already opened to them. During the meal, the three of them shared more stories. Tessa and Nay introduced their homeland, Nigeria, as well as its capital, Abuja, and its largest city, Lagos. They also spoke of the cultural shock they experienced in the United States, prejudices against Africa, and their dreams for the future. Everything was fresh and fascinating to Arthur Caldwell. As they were finishing their meal, Tessa and Nay exchanged glances and cautiously began to reveal their true feelings. "Actually, we developed feelings for you while volunteering. We know you are much older and you might be surprised, but we are deeply drawn to the warmth you exude," they said. Arthur Caldwell was speechless for a moment, startled by the sudden confession. He thought, "What should I say?" The words, "I'm 78 and you're so young," almost slipped out. But Tessa and Nay seemed to have made up their minds. "Age doesn't matter. We believe it's enough that our hearts connect," they said. However, Arthur Caldwell still worried about practical issues. His family would certainly call it nonsense, and society would look down on him. And it wasn't just one person, but two. Overwhelmed by such complex emotions, he simply reassured them that day and went home. But afterward, Tessa and Nye continued to express their affection for him. They emphasized that they wanted to spend time with Arthur Caldwell, not compete with each other. "We won't argue about who came first. One value we learned in the United States is to take care of each other and cooperate. And our feelings for you are so deep and precious that we don't want to monopolize it," they said. Arthur Caldwell was flustered by this unusual situation, but he also felt a strange excitement. He wondered, "Can I truly experience something like this at my age?" It brought a mix of vague excitement and confusion. What perplexed him even more was that it wasn't just one person, but two. Several months passed. The three of them shared tea, participated in volunteer activities and small gatherings, deepening their bond. Of course, Arthur Caldwell questioned himself every time, thinking, "Is this really okay?" But deep down, he strongly felt he didn't want to miss this opportunity. The decisive turning point came when Tessa and Nay presented a special proposal. One evening, the three of them gathered in a quiet cafe. Tessa hesitated, then cautiously began to speak. "Actually, in Nigeria, the custom of polygamy is accepted to some extent. It varies by religion and region, but there are still some families who legally or customarily have multiple wives," she said. Arthur Caldwell felt bewildered, unsure what she meant. "Isn't that illegal in the United States?" "Surely." His voice trailed off. Nay nodded, "Yes, so we thought if you can love both of us, and if we truly want to spend the rest of our lives with you, perhaps you should come to our country. They're getting married, and forming a family with the three of us isn't a big issue." This seemed like a sudden proposal, but their sincerity was evident. Tessa and Nay believed they wouldn't be jealous of each other, and that if Arthur Caldwell decided to do this, the three of them could live together. Arthur Caldwell was utterly shocked. He thought, "Am I to immigrate overseas at my age?" and questioned if this marriage was truly feasible. But at the same time, he recalled the lonely decades he had spent in the United States. His children had formed their own families or were too busy to visit often. His relationships with neighbors, relatives, and acquaintances were also awkward. He gradually began to feel that rather than living out the rest of his life in such solitude, it would be better to live according to his heart's desires. From that day on, the three of them had deeper conversations, legal issues, cultural conflicts, criticisms in the United States. His family's reactions, Arthur Caldwell had too many obstacles to overcome. The two women explained that even if they faced opposition in the United States, they could have a recognized marriage in their home country. They added that not only could all legal procedures be completed, but it could also be done in a form somewhat accepted within their tribe or community. Finally, Arthur Caldwell decided, "How have I lived my life? This is my only life, and I don't want to lose everything by worrying about what others think." He felt strongly that too little time remained to keep his inner life closed off any longer. But this didn't mean the decision was easy. First, he had to gather his children and tell them. The day he gathered his 3 children at home, Arthur Caldwell cautiously began. "I've met 2 people. They are young women, and they're from Africa. They seem to like me." Hearing this, the children were confused, not understanding what he meant. "Dad, are you joking? Are you pulling our leg right now?" one of them said with a laugh. But when Arthur Caldwell's expression turned serious, their laughter stopped. They are both Nigerian women, 22 and 21 years old respectively. When they heard these words, their children's faces filled with surprise and shock. "They're almost 50 years younger than you. That makes no sense. Is this a scam? Maybe they're approaching you to trick you out of your money?" they said with suspicion and anger. This was the reaction Arthur Caldwell had anticipated. He calmly explained who Tessa and Nay were and with what intentions they had approached him. Then he told them his most important conclusion. "I've decided to go to Nigeria and live with both of them." Hearing these words, the children seemed speechless, unable to reply. After a while, the eldest son finally spoke. "Dad, you're comfortable enough living in the United States. Why go there?" Arthur Caldwell calmly stated, "Until now I have lived only for you, but now I want to find a way to be truly happy." The children protested, but they could not overcome Arthur Caldwell's resolve in particular, since he had considerable property and savings. The children worried their father might take all his assets and do something foolish. Arthur Caldwell clearly replied, "I plan to give you a portion as your share, but I will still manage most of it myself, as ownership remains with me, and I might use the money for my new family." At first, the children were even angrier. But as time passed, their emotions calmed. They already knew Arthur Caldwell wouldn't listen to them, and there was nothing they could do to stop his firm will about. Few months later, Arthur Caldwell boarded a plane to Nigeria with Tessa and Nay among his relatives and neighbors. Some poured out criticism, saying, "He's gone mad. He must have been swindled." But he didn't care. Some envied him for finding young partners at his age and encouraged him with jokes. In truth, Arthur Caldwell himself was trembling, his heart filled with fear. Spending the rest of his life in a foreign land was by no means an easy feat. After a long flight, they arrived in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria. But Tessa and Na's family lived in a village near Lagos, a city in the southwest. So the 3 of them changed planes and cars several times before moving to Lagos. Arthur Caldwell was surrounded by unfamiliar sights, from the sound of car horns to the haggling of street vendors to people wearing vibrantly colored fabrics. He gradually realized, "I've truly come to another world." Tessa and Nay made calls everywhere and met with people to arrange accommodation for Arthur Caldwell. Their parents and relatives all welcomed Arthur Caldwell. At first, everyone was surprised, but they said, "According to our customs, a husband can have multiple wives." Of course, this tradition is rare now, but it's not something that needs to be prevented. They temporarily rented a small house in a village near Lagos. Later, Tessa, after consulting with her family, decided to proceed with the formal marriage procedures. According to local customs, if they held a traditional ceremony and received blessings from family relatives and village elders, they would be recognized as husband and wives. Arthur Caldwell was unfamiliar with everything, but he decided to follow their arrangements. A few days later, the wedding finally took place at the village community center. It was completely different from an American wedding. Tessa and Nay, dressed in gorgeous traditional attire, walked out with their respective family elders. Arthur Caldwell changed into clothes bought locally. Wrapped in vibrantly colored fabrics and wearing small decorations on his head, he looked very exotic. The villagers watched the unusual wedding with curious eyes. The groom was a 78-year-old American man, and the brides were two young black women, aged 22 and 21. At first glance, it seemed simply incredible. However, the wedding proceeded more amiably than expected. As traditional percussion instruments sounded, people danced and sang, and the village elder officiating the wedding offered blessings to the three of them. This is a special destiny, given by heaven, allowing a person from a distant place and our two daughters to form a family. Arthur Caldwell's heart was filled with warmth. He was moved by the warmth that welcomed him, a foreigner, and by the fact that he stood beside two brides. After the wedding, the three of them officially became a family. Of course, this was not a legally recognized marriage in the United States, but one based on tradition and local customs. Nevertheless, everyone in the village recognized them as husband and wives, Tessa explained. Ultimately, marriage is not just about legal recognition from the state, but also recognition from tradition and the community. The new marital life that began for the three of them was in many ways both perplexing and sweet. Arthur Caldwell couldn't relax. The thought, "Is it really okay for me to live like this?" endlessly cycled in his mind every night. Yet his two wives expressed their love for him without reservation, and they seemed to have a stronger sense of unity with each other than jealousy. In the mornings, the three of them prepared meals together. Tessa would cut vegetables, Nay would squeeze fruit juice, and Arthur Caldwell would taste. As time went on, Arthur Caldwell began to consider buying a house in this village and starting a small business with the money he brought from the United States. He was already receiving monthly rental income from his building, transferred to his American bank account, so living expenses were not an immediate problem. But he wanted to find a way to ensure a stable long-term life. Tessa and Nay suggested a small business involving trade between the United States and Nigeria. They spoke English, were fluent in local languages, and could easily help Arthur Caldwell in many ways. Of course, this was not easy for Arthur Caldwell, who was not even familiar with the word business, but both wives were very proactive. In addition, Tessa's family also volunteered to help. Eventually, they tried buying and selling things like a small export business. However, Arthur Caldwell was too old to take active steps, so he only provided necessary funds or exchanged information through communication. Just as everything seemed to be settling into a rhythm, another monumental change arrived. Tessa and Nay became pregnant almost simultaneously. When Arthur Caldwell first heard the news, he was so surprised he couldn't even react properly. The thought, "Is it truly possible for me to be a father at this age?" filled him with both joy and trepidation. But his two wives hugged each other and shed tears of joy. "We are both carrying your children. This is truly a blessing." It wasn't until then that Arthur Caldwell calmed down and gradually realized he was going to be a father. He had already raised 3 children in the United States, but they were all grown adults, old enough to have grandchildren. Now, in a completely different country, he was going to welcome new life again. Of course, the pregnancy and childbirth process was not easy. This was a first for both wives, making it even more unfamiliar. Arthur Caldwell also worried about his physical and mental state, as this was a late-life pregnancy for him. Fortunately, there was a relatively large medical facility nearby, and Tessa and Na's relatives had extensive experience with childbirth, so they readily offered advice. Arthur Caldwell renovated the house with the money he received from the United States so that his 2 wives could live comfortably. They expanded the rooms, laid wooden planks on the floor, and enlarged the windows for better ventilation. They also prepared cribs, diapers, clothes, and other items for the babies. They had his children in the United States send some items that were easily available there via international mail. Around mid-pregnancy, Arthur Caldwell began to worry about his children's reaction in the United States. So he called them and said, "You have two new mothers, and they are both expecting my children." At first the children were too shocked to speak, but they had somewhat anticipated it, so they didn't object strongly. "Do as you please, Dad. We are too busy with our own lives to interfere with yours," was the indifferent reply. Nevertheless, the youngest son said, "Please send me a picture when the children are born," which brought Arthur Caldwell great comfort. Finally, the day arrived when the two children were born. Almost simultaneously, Tessa gave birth to a daughter, and Nay gave birth to a son. At the moment of delivery, Arthur Caldwell clasped his hands together, outside the delivery room, praying devoutly. When his two wives safely emerged with their children, he shed tears. "I never thought I would be a father again at such a late age." The villagers were relatively friendly towards this peculiar family. After all, children were born, and Arthur Caldwell's financial situation was good. So he was somewhat of a figure helping the local economy. Occasionally some would joke, "What charm does that old man possess to have two young wives?" But no one openly criticized him. Every day was a surprise and a precious gift for Arthur Caldwell. When he opened his eyes in the morning, he would hear one of the children crying and one of his wives rushing to comfort them. The other wife would gently hum a song. While preparing breakfast, it was a vibrant scene he could never have imagined when he lived alone in the United States. Every moment he was grateful for the idea that he could be reborn like this. Of course, there were conflicts, when the children cried at the same time, when one of the two wives felt unwell, or when they were stressed by other miscellaneous matters, they would become sensitive towards each other. There were also times when Arthur Caldwell would pay more attention to one wife, and the other would feel neglected. However, Tessa said, "If we quarrel ourselves, it's not good for the children," and tried to resolve issues through conversation. In the process, Arthur Caldwell felt an even stronger responsibility to love and care for both of them equally. As time passed, when the two children began to walk, Arthur Caldwell decided to invite his children from the United States to visit their grandchildren here. On one hand, he wanted to reduce the awkwardness between them. On the other hand, he wanted to show them that he was living well. At first, the children hesitated, saying, "How can we go there? It's too dreadful." But the youngest son was the first to say, "I want to visit Nigeria at least once," and decided to go. The rest of the children followed suit. Just like that, the entire family gathered for the first time in many years. However, this place was a small village near Lagos. On the way from the airport to the village, the children's eyes widened at the unfamiliar scenery. "Dad lives in a place like this. No matter how many times I hear it, I can't believe it," they marveled. When they arrived at the house and opened the door, Tessa and Nay greeted them cheerfully. Behind them were babies crawling around. When the eldest daughter saw this, she mumbled, "Are they really my siblings?" Arthur Caldwell gave an embarrassed laugh. The atmosphere was a bit awkward, but as Tessa and Nay served carefully prepared meals and hot tea, they gradually opened up. In particular, the children thought, "This is not what I imagined. They really aren't just trying to take advantage of my father, thanks to the two wives' kind and pure demeanor." After staying for a few days, the children took care of the babies, went to the market together to buy local food, and grew closer to each other. They wandered around the neighborhood, visited village festivals, and realized that their father had settled down in this place. The youngest son honestly said, "He seems more vibrant and happy than when he lived in the United States. It's a bit shocking, but now I want to support him." Arthur Caldwell's words were the greatest comfort and support. He gathered his children and said, "I will use most of my remaining property to live here, and I will give you a small portion as inheritance. But I will not transfer everything, because I must create a more stable life with these children and my two wives." As expected, the children showed a little disappointment, however. They were already somewhat living their own lives, and they no longer competed for their father's property as fiercely as before. Furthermore, the new family their father had created, which they saw with their own eyes, was by no means a fantasy or a scam. The children crawled around in the sunlight, and the two wives looked at Arthur Caldwell with loving eyes. After completing their multi-day visit, the children left saying they seemed to understand their father a little better now. Of course not, everyone in the world would understand. But if at least his own children recognized and accepted this, it was nothing short of a miracle for Arthur Caldwell. Afterward, Arthur Caldwell bought a small shop in a city near Lagos. It was a cafe and also a simple general store. Tessa and Nay took turns managing the shop, doing business with locals and foreigners. They sold simple food, a mix of dried goods from the United States and ingredients found only there. And the response was surprisingly good. Meanwhile, as time passed, Arthur Caldwell began to feel physical limitations. In his old age, his body was not what it used to be. He felt dizzy due to high blood pressure and sometimes experienced chest pain. Each time his two wives cared for him wholeheartedly. From folk remedies to visits to the local hospital for checkups to adjusting his diet. Arthur Caldwell felt that thanks to their meticulous care, he was receiving the warmest protection in the world. Time flowed relentlessly, and soon enough, the children born to Tessa and Nay were old enough for kindergarten. The children were gradually learning both the local language and English. As he was asked to refrain from using foreign languages, Arthur Caldwell tried to have simple conversations with the children in English, and the children reached out their hands, calling him Dad in clumsy voices. Seeing this, Arthur Caldwell's eyes welled up. Dad wants to live a long, long time and watch you grow up well. On one occasion, the children from the United States visited Nigeria again. They had heard their father's health was not good and were worried about him. This time, several grandchildren also came, and with families from both countries mingling. The house had a festive atmosphere. Arthur Caldwell's grandchildren and Tessa and Na's children played together, conversing in awkward words. Do you speak English? Yes, a little. Is this your first time here? Such adorable conversations continued. Arthur Caldwell watched this scene, his eyes filled with tears. I never imagined I would have such a rich and full family. The children also witnessed this scene and realized once again what kind of path their father had walked and how fulfilling his life was now. That night, the family gathered in the front yard, sharing a simple meal. Under the lamplight, Tessa and Nay skillfully prepared local food, and the children from the United States brought out some American comfort food, and they ate together. Dishes transcending two cultures filled the table. After a burst of laughter, Arthur Caldwell slowly began to speak. Actually, I've always felt sorry and grateful to you. I may have unsettled you by living the way I wanted, and if I hadn't made this decision, I could have lived a more stable life. But because I chose this path, there are also nights like this where I can laugh with all of you. The children quietly nodded. They didn't blame or criticize each other, but knew it was much better to respect their father's ultimate choice and share in the joy. Thereafter, time continued its relentless march. Arthur Caldwell's health deteriorated, and sometimes he found it difficult to get out of bed. Tessa and Nay took turns staying up to care for him. Each time, Arthur Caldwell laboriously raised his hand and stroked his children. Don't worry, I'm so happy to see you all by my side like this. One day, Arthur Caldwell wrote a final letter to his children and left it behind. I will follow the path I have chosen to the very end, and I will not regret being buried in Nigeria. If you can come to my funeral, I would be grateful. Please take care of Tessa and Na's children. I have left a portion of my assets to you, so do not ask for more and bless me. I love you all. Arthur Caldwell himself didn't know when this letter would be delivered. However, what he wanted to protect, to the very end in this world with his remaining breath, was love. Although this was not an ordinary path and would never be easily tolerated in American society, the three families he found in a foreign land somehow demonstrated true love. As time passed, the day came when Arthur Caldwell closed his eyes and did not wake again. Even at the moment of his passing, Tessa and Nay held his hand tightly. His children stroked their father's white hair and wept aloud. His children from the distant United States hurried over upon hearing the news, but he had already passed away. The funeral, following Nigerian traditions, was simple yet solemn. The villagers, though bewildered, expressed their condolences and sympathy. After all, procedures were completed. The children embraced Tessa and Nay and their children. "Thank you for being with my father. I hope you too, and the children are well," It was clearly a tearful farewell, but something infinitely warm was left behind. The family Arthur Caldwell created was not a common form, nor was it an easy or smooth path. But at least they lived by genuinely loving and embracing each other. And Arthur Caldwell's precious heart, which he wanted to protect until the very end, had deeply rooted itself in this land. Tessa and Nay would continue to build a better life based on Arthur Caldwell's legacy and the shop. The children are still growing, learning the cultures of both countries. One day when they grow up, they will introduce themselves saying, "Our father came from the United States and lived here with 2 mothers." And people might be surprised, but the children will smile and say, "It's a beautiful love story. My father was very happy that we were born." Communication with the children in the United States also remained sporadic. They sometimes watched videos of the 2 children calling them their siblings and sent greetings to Tessa. In this way, 2 cultures and 2 families connected with each other. Regardless of how the world viewed it, Arthur Caldwell's choice was a steadfast and beautiful journey, one where he made the only life decision for himself. He did not live out a miserable and lonely old age. Instead, like a final flame, he loved passionately until the end. Finding his resting place in Nigeria, and those who remained remembered his story and nodded in acknowledgement of his unconventional yet genuine courage. The message this story conveys to us is clear. Love can sometimes transcend common sense, defy prejudice, and blossom through the myriad obstacles of the world. And if you don't let go, true happiness can permeate no matter how distant and rugged the path may seem. So some might say, "Is this really possible? This is absurd." But the lives that Arthur Caldwell, Tessa, and Nay demonstrated were undeniably real. Though his life had ended, the love contained within their own home, within their story, and within the laughter of their children continues under the Nigerian sky. It is said that a part of Arthur Caldwell's last letter read, "I realize too late that people ultimately gain nothing if they hesitate. I also have many regrets. But now when I look back, every moment was a miracle." What greater blessing could there be than the 2 people who came to me and those children just like that sentence? His life was a leap of belated love and family. Not everyone in the world can choose the same path. But at least this story gives us hope that we can bravely open the door at least once. Love doesn't necessarily stop coming back just because you're old or because you failed before. Finally, all these currents culminated in the small miracle Arthur Caldwell left behind. His assets and story connected people from 2 continents, and Tessa and Na's children remember him with unchanging affection. Some were surprised, calling it a twilight romance, while others shook their heads because it was too unusual. But there is only one truth. Arthur Caldwell smiled until the very end, in a foreign land, closing his eyes peacefully. By his side, his 2 wives wept and held his hand. No matter what others say, this alone was beautiful enough. Because there is no easy love in the world, he was all the more brave, passionate until the end, and ultimately found and walked the path that was most like him. That is why we also learn from this story, life can give you a new beginning at unexpected moments. And whether you seize or miss that opportunity is simply each person's choice. And if you open your heart and embrace each other, you can become a family no matter what trials you encounter. On the path you choose, wherever you are. Thus, Arthur Caldwell's decision planted an American connection in a village on a distant continent, leaving a burning impression in the hearts of the people there. At the end of that road, he tasted the true happiness he had long craved and closed his eyes. One might call this an unconventional and bizarre love. But those who observed his story from the sidelines unanimously agreed. He was so desperate that he lived a more beautiful life than anyone. This is precisely the miraculous family story created by a 78-year-old American man and two young black women aged 22 and 21. Thank you for watching today. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe, like, and comment.